Welcome to another expert interview. Depending on where you're listening to this, please make sure like, comment, share some love. If you have additional questions for today's guest, that's amazing as well, because we can either do a part two, or maybe we'll just create some shorts for you to answer those questions. Again, the more value we can provide, the better, and hopefully we inspire you to do something great. As always, we jump straight in. So Neal, welcome. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey man, thanks for doing this today. Like we were just talking about, we connected a couple months ago. You're booked on my podcast, I think in a couple of weeks. And anytime I get an opportunity to share kind of this, let's just call it crazy journey with people, I'm happy to do it. So thanks for providing the space for this.
For sure, man. Glad you could make some time.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot of things these days, but I think ultimately what I'm known for right now is, really I've been really taking a deep dive into, what leadership, influence, high performance look like in 2023. And to give everybody a little bit of background on how I got to kind of this place, a New York City native, grew up in New York City, with what New York City has to offer, the diversity of it, the cultural around it, the ethnic diversity of it, and really had like a kind of a scrappy childhood. Joined the United States Marine Corps, spent a bunch of years in the Marine Corps, forward deployed and deployed overseas, came out of the Marine Corps post 9/11 and jumped right into the corporate world and, ended up working at some of the largest corporate companies in the world and being really thrown into a lot of big business opportunities. A lot of it was just luck and me working really, really persistently and consistently, and maybe even a little bit of a masochist, because at that point in New York City, the easiest way for you to make really good money is to jump into the corporate world because there's so many corporations there. Ultimately, I couldn't find happiness in that. And so I jumped into the startup technology world, built a couple of my own companies, became really fascinated by the emotional constructs of sales and marketing. And then ultimately got to a place where I wasn't really happy and didn't feel like I was serving kind of a greater good. And so I kind of shifted gears in 2018. And, some people might call me a coach, some people might call me a facilitator. But basically now I lead and instruct people from the Fortune 500 all the way down to small, medium-sized businesses on ideas around influence, leadership, purpose, and really what it takes to take a good employee or a good business owner and turn them into a great employee or a great business owner.
That's epic, man. I love your journey. I know we connected and resonated so much on the path. And, am I built for corporate? Am I built for entrepreneurship? Right. And I know you had that struggle as well. I want to hit on one thing a previous guest and I talked about is that transition out of military and into either corporate or entrepreneurship. Do you have any advice for someone that might be listening to this and they're coming up on that transition?
Yeah, I love and appreciate the question. It's a really, really tough one because what happens is there's this interesting thing that happens in the military. I can only speak to the Marine Corps, and I'm not going to trash talk to the branches, but I'll give you a good example. In the Marine Corps, there is one of the highly developed trainings and a book around it called Leadership Principles and Doctrine. And I didn't recognize at the time the value of it. But when I got into the corporate world and got past the resume writing and past it, some people who were much more older than me, experts in their field, bigger educational degrees, people with master degrees, would be like, wow, like, where did you learn these leadership principles from? And I'd be like, yeah, I've been doing them since I was 18 because they were kind of shoved in my head by the United States Marine Corps. And it takes a lot of time because I think what people in the military don't realize is that the tools that they have been taught to keep them alive and the people around them are very sophisticated leadership tools and skills and expertise that have just been broken down to these very, very finite, simple things that they just become how we operate through our day to day, not realizing that the average person who went to go get a college degree or went and started their own business or whatever other version of that is, didn't get that. And so I remember my very first resume was literally, supervised 12 Marines through this many live fire exercises, conducted safety drills and, this and this and this. And it really took somebody to kind of look through that and be like, oh, so you're a good manager. So you're good with resources. So you're good with managing budgets. So you're trustable. So you have a high level of integrity. And I think the advice I would give to anybody is have somebody write down your resume. That way it's in your words the first time. And then have somebody who is not or was not in the military, who's in the professional background that you're looking to get into, have them read it, have them give you constructive feedback and be like, let's break this down into what this actually means. Because I often say, especially for veterans, sometimes you just got to really get uncomfortable with taking the camouflage off, because underneath that camouflage, there are so many skills and tools, and there's so much amazing things about you, but you got to take the camouflage off sometimes.
Such amazing advice. And I love that for anyone, right? If you're transitioning, maybe transitioning industries as well, sometimes the lingo doesn't align. And I think that that's amazing advice to really dive into, like, no, what does the corporate hiring professional, what are they trying to read? And what skills do you actually bring to the table? So I love that journey that you went through, because you're right. So much of it is transferable skill, yet it may not sound like it.
Yeah, and that's really what it was for me, was like, just to paint a little bit of a picture for folks listening. I came out of the Marine Corps. I got really, really lucky, and I got a job at Guggenheim Partners, which is one of the world's largest hedge funds. And I was just this sponge of knowledge. And I had more years carrying a backpack on my back than I had, in the corporate world. And so I was learning about commodities and how to make transactions and the security of transactions and securities and trading commissions, and just like scooping up all this information, but also like paying attention to like everything here is a system, everything here is a process, everything here is a project. And then, when I left there and went on to Cushman and Wakefield, which is one of the largest global commercial real estate firms at the time, and the same thing, learned so much about real estate, but more so about what's the system, what's the process, what's the procedure. And then it took me through a couple other corporate companies. And then when I came out into the startup world, where people who are starting their own businesses or starting a small, medium-sized business, you have to become like this Swiss Army knife, because you don't have all the people doing all the things yet, let alone having the systems, the projects, and the procedures built out yet. So people that I work with, even as a consultant, would be like, how do you know how to do so many things? Like, how are you, an expert at how to get influence with people? How did you become a leadership expert? How did you become a technology expert? How did you become so good at cybersecurity? And I was like, I just became really good at recognizing that everything is a system, a process, and procedure. And that was like the key piece of it. The other thing is if you look at what really makes up every single company, it's always going to be people, process, and technology. Like every single time that you are trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, or what type of business you want to run, or even what the problems are or the challenges in the business, you just have to ask yourself, is it a people problem? Is it a process problem? Or is it a process problem? And you can literally kind of dissect everything that's going on. You might have to learn the subject matter experience, the lingo, the acronyms, but those are all just things that happen from, getting time in that territory or time in that category. And that stuff's pretty easy.
Love that. So talk to me about influence, right? I think when people hear influence, they might think one or two different things. And so let's talk about like true pure influence. Where do we start the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of these words, influence is a really tough word. I used to really struggle with the word influence, because I think I just had a different understanding of what it means. But when you talk about peer-to-peer influence, what you have to recognize is we all, every single one of us, we all influence each other every single day. Right. And that goes for your family, it goes for your children, it goes for your business partners, it goes for how you see people in a neighborhood you go in. You go into your grocery store where you get your food from. You are influenced by not only the people that go there, versus how they store and what type of food they have, right? And so, in a time where we're still kind of unraveling kind of 2020 for a lot of people, I think peer to peer influence is so important because many of us spent so much time kind of at home under our own influences. And we ultimately do also influence ourselves, right? And so one of the things that I've become, really, really focused on is how do you make sure that you are getting the right influences in your life from a peer to peer, perspective. And also how, like, if you recognize that you influence people every single day, you will then kind of give it a different power, be more conscious of it. And, I'll give you like a couple, just like, two quick examples. I always use a basketball example because it's just kind of really relevant to a lot of people. It's playoff season right now. So it's like if a basketball team is not doing so well, right, in their season, and a new player arrives, a rookie, and he's got the uniform on, he's tucked in the right ways, they give him the ball, he takes a couple of free throws, the whole team is watching, and he gets them in, and the whole team goes, all right, we might have something here, right? He's influenced, even though he's the rookie, even though he's the most junior person in the team, he is influencing how others react to him, right? That will give them a little jump of energy, right? The same thing happens with your business. How the boss shows up every day. I don't care if he's the boss. I don't care if he's the one in charge, but how the business owner chooses to show up every day to work, shows up on time, leaves on time, how they follow up with emails, how they engage with people in emails, how they speak to people, making eye contact. A lot of very simple things will drive the influence that that person has on the business. And that will then fold down into how the employees then engage with their customers.
Hmm. So it's not the typical, and I'm so glad you went that direction because I think people here become an influencer, right? And they want to be on TikTok and social media and trending. And yes, that is a type of influence, but you're talking about deep, meaningful peer-to-peer influence. And yes, there's a lot of other ways, marketing and sales, there's influence and all of that. Where do you see people go wrong in a business world? Where do you see a business leader, lose their influence? What are some of the downsides or things that they're doing wrong?
I love this question. I very much appreciate it. I think one of the challenges about for business owners is most times they're going to start a business that they have influence in, right? They're going to be good at something, right? It could be the most mundane task. Maybe they're really, really good at, I don't know, providing waivers for insurance or something like that, right? Which is not the most sexy of businesses, but they could be the best at it. They could see the opportunity for it. So they have influence on it because they're really, really good at it, right? You could be a lawyer. You're really good at something in the legal field. You have influence over it, right? You could want to sell t-shirts. Maybe you're just a very artistic person and you have influence, or maybe you have a good brand and you want to make t-shirts and you have influence because your brand is that tight. I think places where people mess up the most is that influence kind of feeds their ego a little bit. And then they don't feel safe enough to ask for help in the areas that they just aren't good at. And I was taught a long time ago that in the world of creating your own business, in the world of entrepreneurship, there really is only three types of entrepreneurs. Now, that's a broad brush stroke. Some people can listen to this and be like, well, there's another version, maybe. But ideally, most entrepreneurs fall into these three buckets. The first one is there's always a visionary, right? There's this person who has this great idea. That idea turns into a strategy. That idea turns into, and that strategy turns into sales. They're typically the salesperson in the organization, right? Then you have the operator, which is the person who loves building systems and processes and executing. And that person usually becomes the chief operating officer in a business, the operations person. And then you have the finance entrepreneur, which, it doesn't really care about the vision, doesn't see the vision all the time, doesn't need to be involved in strategy, doesn't need to be involved in the systems and processes, but just looks at the profit losses the whole time and just looks at are we making enough money to do this? Because money creates oxygen, which creates fuel, which creates, space for the business capacity. And I think the biggest thing for business leaders and business owners is most business owners, if they start the business on their own, there is that period of time that you do have to be all three of those things, in your own right. And number one, those people should get some kind of coach or somebody who has something that they don't have, so that they have that asset involved with them. And then the other piece of it is thinking that once you start to bring in revenue, once you start to really, the gears start to turn in your business, you got to learn how to ask for help. You got to get people that are better at the things that you really don't even want to be good at to help you do that.
So tying influence to expertise sounds like there's a little bit of that, right? Where you might lack influence if you're not able to really dive in on a topic. And I know that's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs, right? Is to delegate and hire and do those things. Do you find that imposter syndrome comes up? I know it's a conversation I've had with quite a few entrepreneurs recently where, they feel like they're in a place they don't belong. Do you feel like that might impact influence?
I think it does. I think imposter syndrome is a really interesting thing in the entrepreneur space because, I've had to teach myself over the years that, most entrepreneurs are fundamentally, whatever business they're in, they're fundamentally doing it for the first time. Right. And so how much of an imposter could you be if it's the first time you've ever done something, right? So you oftentimes when I coach people through those conversations, you know, I really do walk them through that conversation to be like, if you were claiming to be, having done something for 20 years, and a lot of people do that. Let's just say somebody, is an HVAC mechanic for 20 years working for somebody else when they start their own business. And then they feel like, who am I to be, making these decisions, right? Which is the course of imposter syndrome. Sometimes we just need to be walked through that, because what happens is a lot of times in the world of fast growth and mindset, we're moving so fast that we're actually moving faster than kind of the narrative or the story that we oftentimes have laid out. And so sometimes we just need somebody to help us like lay down, I've done a lot of work around this, lay down some new neural pathways actually, so that you can kind of be reminded that, you belong at that table or you belong in these places. And I can give you a really good example that when I first started coaching people like in one-on-one sessions about 5 years ago, I was about 6 months into it. I've been pretty successful in a bunch of different things, but never as a coach, and really felt drawn to, after I had had several coaches over the past several years, I was really drawn into the fact of how much they had helped me get through some stuff physically, mentally, emotionally, business wise. And I was like, I want to help people. I really want to help people to go through this. And you get some frameworks, you get some structures in place. And so I got this coaching client. This coaching client, he made in a year what I made every 5 years. And I remember being like taking the coaching call, talking him through the coaching. He was coachable, which is an amazing thing that people really need to ask themselves. Can I receive this feedback and do something with it? I remember getting off the phone years ago, and he told me about his lifestyle, and he told me about his family, and he told me about all these things. And I hung up the phone and I was like, what the hell am I going to coach this guy on? And I kind of sat with myself for a minute, and it was a really good opportunity. And the phrase that kind of comes to me that I always remind myself of over the years is that when people get, triggered by these events, right? The imposter syndrome of people, they're triggered by something. For anybody who likes to shoot rifles or pistols of any type of form, I happen to love it. You know, bullets are expensive. And so I always tell people, never waste a trigger. Like really like look at for a minute, what am I triggered about? Why is this triggering to me? Why is this person triggering me? And what do I need to do about it to make sure it doesn't happen again? And so back to my story about this guy who I was like triggered by. We must have gotten about 6 weeks into the coaching, and the guy opened up to me and started telling me some of how he really felt about himself and some of his like challenges around his mindset and challenges around his own self-worth and his own certainty. And I was like, oh, I can so help this guy. I can help him. Like, I know how to help this guy. And, it's a big realization that, we all build these egos and pedestals in our business. And it becomes hard because we all want to be the expert. We all want to be really good at what we do. We all want to make money and get that validation. But, you know, spending the time on, developing how to influence conversations will create less stress in your life. And then you don't have to apply pressure to people, in that way. And then the imposter syndrome stuff kind of will fade away, because if you really do feel like you have influence in conversations, you won't question that you're supposed to be at that table or not.
I love that your moment there is I sat in it, right? Like I sat with it and process. And I feel like often, right, the entrepreneurs run in a million directions, even leaders are running a million directions. But taking that time, like that was a big takeaway from what I just heard is, sitting in it, right? Why am I feeling it? What's making me feel it? How do I react to it? And
Mm.
so I love that because I know I catch myself sometimes running down a path and then you like pause and you're like, well, wait, why am I here? Like, why am I down this reaction path? Let me go back, right? And let me make sure that I'm actually reacting in a way that aligns or that goes with where I want to go.
Yeah. And I think one of the big realizations I've worked through is, I remember a couple of years ago hearing I think it was a social media quote or video or something like that. But as a society, we're seeking so much gratification constantly, right? I want to be the winner. I want my friends to know I'm the winner. I want my friends to win. I want the thing that I want now. I want Amazon to deliver the thing to me tomorrow. And a lot of these things are good things, right? But I really have become a huge advocate that when it comes to garnering influence, that the way that you do one thing is always the way that you do everything. And so why that's important into this example I gave you is, the ability to sit, right, and think about what's going on here for a moment before being reactive. I mean, that plays out in your business. It'll play out in your personal relationship at home with your family. It'll play out with your friends. It'll play out in your own mind. It'll play out in your own health. It'll play out in your own goal planning. And a lot of times, the word that I use is people have to become really, really good at creating a little bit of space for themselves. You got to have space in order for you to really think and really like decompress and then be like, all right, what do I really want to achieve here?
Perfect. Well, let's pivot a little bit and let's talk about your team, right? So we talked a lot about you, the owner, the entrepreneur, the person. What about team members? And maybe we talk about two subjects. One, how do we work with team members that appear to be struggling? Do you have some advice on how to tackle those conversations?
I'm pretty structured when it comes to teams. I think building a culture is super important. I think like fundamentally, culture always seems like it's number five on the list of to dos, right? Number one being make the money. Number two being spend the money on things that we can make more money with. Number three, being, whatever it is. And number four being whatever it is. And then we think about culture. And culture is not pizza on Fridays. It's not the beer fridge it's not the ping pong table in the office. Culture is the most important thing because culture will be the glue that holds people together when things get tough. And, I think it's important that when you can build that culture, people will naturally align with it and then they have something to hold on to versus, the only reason that that employee took that job is because of the pay. The first time that, pay is a little bit late or they got to take time off for work and their paycheck is a little short, it just will erode that conversation. The stress of delivering goods and services to your customers will erode that conversation. And so culture fundamentally the number one thing. I'll also add to that that I've been going through this really interesting exercise with one of my companies I'm coaching, where they have a large organization of good employees. And the kind of campaign that's been going on, or the strategy, is that the we are taking that organization from good to great. And I've been doing a ton of research, and I think it's really important because people love to tell people you're doing a good job or you did a great job. But really, I think people get lost in the words and don't realize like what these words actually mean and how you get to these places. And so I've gone down this kind of deep research hole around like what are the mechanisms that draw people and guide people and kind of empower them to go from good to great. And there's two key things. And it's not the two things that most people would think. There's two key things that actually help differentiate and decide what makes a good player great. The first one is that they always seek to get better. That's fundamentally, they are right away being like, yeah, I'm really good at this, but like maybe I can learn something from you. Maybe I can learn from somebody else, right? That fundamentally they don't go, I am the Oz of whatever it is, like no one's better than me, right? Because that's an ego-driven thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's a proven system that when an employee is given feedback, the speed at which they are able to take that feedback and integrate it into their process will determine like how successful they can be at anything, right? So, somebody says, hey, you're doing a great job, I really appreciate it, can I get you to do this a little bit faster, a little bit slower, a little bit more creative, a little bit more efficiently, whatever it is? And the person just goes, yep, got it, boss, I'll make that happen. And then they consciously think about, all right, what was I really just told right now? So those two things are critical if you're looking to groom an employee, because now in a lot of the employment world, people are hiring people with the idea that they want to groom people, into more sophisticated roles. It's interesting that some of the questions that we use for interviewing people, or some of the questions that we ask people, or some of the things we put in the job description, but we're very rarely actually asking people, do you kind of have a mantra that you always want to get better at what you do? Like, do you subscribe to that idea? And how do you handle it when somebody gives you constructive feedback?
Mm. Man, you were dropping wisdom. I love when we just pack value, and I always have a moment where I'm like, hey, go back and listen to this segment. That's probably the moment I'm going to recommend, because I think there's so much truth in there in navigating leading a team, and leading a team is very complex. But your advice in there really helps with struggling team members or amazing team members, because it lets you really figure out where they're at, where you want them to go, clear communication. That's awesome, man. So talk to me about the bad employee, like the employee that like is not a fit. like
Yeah.
like is there a way to make them better? Is there a path? Is there like, do we put them on a performance improvement plan? Talk people through that. Like they have this troubling employee. How do they navigate that?
I love this question, and I'm going to bring it full circle back to this topic, where that's where like that, more than anything, that's where influence is critical, right? Because the way that people, to use that word, the way that employees become non-performing is that they've lost influence, right? That really is what it comes down to. And really creating that team feeling of like that you have influence on this team. It's an investment of some extra time and resources, rather than going through that performance improvement plan. The other thing that I also kind of always recommend, especially to small business owners, is a very, very good friend of mine taught this to me years ago, and I've used it ever since. That whenever there is a person that let's just say, don't connect with, right? So in the workplace, you could have this employee who just doesn't seem happy, right? And they're just a bad performer, or whatever words you want to put around it, right? But basically what you're saying is that that person does not connect with the culture, right, of the organization. The question I always ask people like this is, what makes you happy? And And as wild as it is, right, that person will feel seen and heard. And number one, and number two, when we really know like what makes somebody happy, you can then drive them, right, which is then garnering influence in all kinds of different directions, right? So if somebody says to, like, what makes you happy? If somebody says, I love spending time with my dogs, or somebody says, nothing makes me happier than my family, or nothing makes me happier than baking, you know, going on vacation, right? Whatever those things are. If somebody if that's really how they feel, then you can say in return to that, be like, you know, it would be great. It would be great that when the commissions come out for next month, if you could take your whole commission and get 100% of it and go on that vacation that you want to go on. Because I know you going on vacation with your husband is what makes you happy. Tell me for a second what that would feel like for you to go home and be like, honey, we're going on vacation, right? But you can only kind of tap into that level of genius if, like, you know that that's that person's pedal that you can tap on, right? And so I think it's always like that we obviously reach points where performance improvement plans and action has to be taken. But I feel like there's so many steps there, especially in today's, workplace, where when we build a culture, when that culture influences the employees, everybody feels like they're part of that culture and part of that influence. And then you get to partner with them on asking them really what it is that makes them happy. And then what do you, as the manager or business owner, or whatever it is, need to do in order for you to help those people achieve that level of happiness? That's the difference between a very high performing business culture and people who are just getting lucky.
Such a simple question too, right? Like it's not like you're not giving this business owner 19 questions to ask. You're not like it's simple. And so I appreciate that feedback because it's digestible. I think we all could implement that and have that moment of like, what perspective are we trying to chase?
Right. Right. And it all comes down to the choice, right? I mean, like, I think it comes down to the choice of the organization to really think about like making that little extra investment, in time and resources instead of kind of the, let's get it done now kind of mentality.
Perfect. Well, let's move to the last few questions. I want to respect your time. I know you're busy. So first question I'd love to ask is if you could give your younger self advice, what would that advice be?
Ooh, good question. If I could give the my younger self advice, what would I give? I would two words, and I think it's the same words for everybody. Play bigger.
Hmm.
Like play hard. I've played really big in my life. Play hard, but play harder, fall harder, get back up, and see what you learn from that.
Love it. Give us a book recommendation. What's a book that you're loving? I know you mentioned one earlier, but is there another book you recommend everyone should pick up or check out?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'll share with you. I'm reading a bunch of books now. If I look around, I'm looking at my bookshelves. I'm actually reading. It's actually a curveball. I'll throw it at everybody at folks. I'm reading A Course in Miracles, and it is super dense. It's amazing. You can only read literally. I can, maybe people are better at this than I am. I can only read like a paragraph or two at a time, and I got to put it down. But it's an epic, amazing book.
Hmm. I say books like that that really make you dig in and think. Those books are really impactful. They may take a while though, but and I love that. I love the random advice. We've had some history book recommendations. Like I love it. I love the stuff that's not normal. So I appreciate that. How do people reach out to you? How can people connect with you, continue the conversation, dig in if they need help?
Yeah, the one last thing I'll mention is one of the things that might be interesting just to close out on, and if anyone's interested in reaching out, one of the things I've become a huge advocate for in 2023, especially, is people. We have a comfort crisis. Like, we have a crisis of people are just way too comfortable. And so when things change, the news, the politics, the economics, it's becoming harder and harder for people to, you know, standardize or normalize themselves. And so we've been running these retreats and excursions that kind of specialize in taking people out of their comfort zones. We have a whole bunch of different themes. We do a bunch of them a year. So if anyone's, you can look on my social media and you can see examples of some of them. But for anybody who's looking to get a hold of me or wants to follow me on social media, my social media handles are at I am Neal, Neal Conlon, Conlon, or www.nealconlon.com.
Love it. Last question I always ask is, what did we miss? Is there anything today you feel like we should have talked about that we left on the table that we have to dive into?
I'm just excited. I think we covered all the great things. Maybe we come back and do a part 2 in the future if folks have questions. I'm just excited to be here on this podcast with you. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Neal, I appreciate you, man. I know you're training for an Ironman. We talked about that. So I'm wishing you the best on that journey, man. I don't know how you're allocating those 3 hours a day to work out. I feel like that's my house renovation time right now, but I respect you, brother. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the advice, and thank you for always adding value.
Yeah, man. You too. Bye.